Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today we have the well-known scholar in Islamic studies and the Hadith studies, Professor Dr. Jonathan Brown. And today he will speak about the topic Evidentiary, Maxims in Hadith criticism and interpretation and more. Professor Brown, it's our pleasure to have you in our OPER seminar in Tübingen, and inshallah next time we wish to welcome you in Tübingen personally. And now you can begin.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be included among the list of scholars who are presenting in your seminar. It's a very impressive group. So it's very flattering for me. So originally I was supposed to present about current issues in Hadith studies or something, but that was only because I did not reply to the email asking me what my title was because I was too disorganized. So I figured the organizers just added that title in because they had no idea what else to do. And I could have talked about something like this, but I think it would not be that interesting, or it would be kind of maybe too interesting. Who knows? But I figured this is my chance I was like, there's actually a project I was working on for a long time, and I'm going to speak about this because maybe this audience will appreciate it. So this is something that I was looking at I maybe been working on since I was in grad school, which was a long time ago now. But and it's about a maxim, qaida. You could say, qaida usuliyya or qaida, probably qaida usuliyya, like a interpretive or evidentiary maxim, which is al-muthbit muqaddam ala al-nafi. Al-muthbit muqaddam ala al-nafi. The person or the party that is affirming something supersedes or is presumed to supersede the one denying it, right? So the superseder, the affirmation supersedes denial, basically, if we could think about that. And muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. I'm just going to use the Arabic because it's easier than English, I think. Muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. This is something I noticed when I was doing my dissertation or when I was in grad school, and I just kind of kept a track of this anytime I came across it. And I could probably do one of those Shamila searches for this and find a lot more material. But this just represents what I've come across on my own, which I think is also interesting because it's not just the instances in which you have that exact wording used, but also in which you have alterations of that wording, or also just the concept itself instead of necessarily any literal deployment of that maxim. So anyway, I thought this would be an interesting thing to go over and see how it's used. This maxim actually appears very early on in Islamic intellectual history. I mean, we have evidence of it very early on in the Kitab al-Tamyiz of Imam Muslim bin al-Hajjaj al-Nisapuri from Nishapur, who died in 261, 875 of the Common Era. In his Kitab al-Tamyiz, a small book, part of which has survived on his kind of discussion of the methodology of Hadith criticism, he says that الحديث الزائد والحافظ لأنه في معنى الشاهد الذي قد حفظ في شهادته ما لم يحفظ صاحبه والحفظ الغالب على النسيان وقاد عليه. Right. So what he says essentially is that a narration or someone making a claim about material that other narrations or other transmitters don't have is like a witness who has recalled something or remembers something that other witnesses have forgotten. So it's interesting. In this case, you have this idea that somebody affirming something or adding it is like someone in bearing testimony and remembers something that somebody else has not forgotten, has forgotten or did not remember. Imam al-Tahawi, the famous Hanafi Hadith scholar who died 321, about 932 of the Common Era, he uses it in his Sharh Mushkil al-Athar, a massive text dealing with interpretation of Hadith and reconciliation of different Hadith evidence. He uses it to argue that one narration of a Hadith with an additional clause in it should be taken over another, should be taken as opposed to another narration that lacks that clause. And he says, "Az-za'id awla min an-naqis." The thing that is adding is better than the thing that is, missing something. Again, that's his Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar. Then the Shafi jurist, oh, hey, assalamu alaikum. How's it going? A famous Shafi jurist and legal theorist, Abu Sulaiman Hamd al-Khattabi, who died in 998 of the Common Era. He was from Bust. Today, that's, I think, Lashkar Gah in Afghanistan. He's a fascinating scholar. I think he's one of the, I mean, maybe someone's already studied this, but his works are one of the places you see maybe the most common or frequent deployment of al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya wal-Usuliyya in Islamic history, as far as I know. I mean, his books are just full of these. He's a very competent jurist, a Shafi jurist, also a theologian known for not liking kalam. He wrote a big multi-volume book condemning kalam. And also the earliest hadith commentary we have, for example, on Sunan Abu Dawud, and Sahih Bukhari, are by al-Khattabi. And he says on the issue of raising your hands in prayer, so when you do your prayer, say, Allahu Akbar, or something like that. And then when you go to bow, Allahu Akbar, you go down, you come up with your hands like this. If you're a Hanafi, you don't do that. Or a Maliki, you go down this and you come up without raising your hands. But if you're a Shafi or a Hanbali, you go like this, like that. So there's lots of hadiths that say both, right? There are both lots of hadiths that can be marshaled for both positions. But what al-Khattabi says is al-ithbat awla min al-nafi. So the hadiths that affirm that the Prophet raised his hands in prayer trump those that deny that or say that he didn't do that. This maxim, especially as it comes, I think it'd be interesting to see where it comes out of, because unless I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me that it originates amongst hadith scholars or in the early Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah circles, and then, of course, spreads much more widely. But it's linked to the notion of ziyadat al-thiqa, which means the addition made by the trustworthy party, or trustworthy transmitter. And this is the idea that if you have, let's say, 10 narrations of a hadith, and one of them says, 9 of them say X, and one of them says X plus Y, if the narration that says X plus Y is narrated by a reliable transmitter, you should take that addition, even though actually it's the minority position. This is maybe not the position of early Muslim hadith scholars, but early Sunni hadith scholars, but it becomes accepted as the general or mainstream position by the time you get to the 1000s of the Common Era. Or, for example, it's not just about like the text of a hadith; it could also be the normative force of the hadith. So, if you had, let's say, 10 narrations of a report, and 9 of them attributed to Umar bin al-Khattab, so it's his ruling, and then one of them attributes it to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, according to the principle of ziyad al-thiqa, you would take the version that's attributed to the Prophet Muhammad if it's transmitted by a reliable transmitter, even if it's, again, only 1 out of 10 narrations. So that's especially in the early period and amongst hadith scholars, you'll see this notion of al-muthbit muqaddam al-nafi a lot of times invoked along with or in association with this idea of ziyadat al-thiqa, the acceptability of the trustworthy transmitter. Anybody have any questions so far? I mean, if anyone has any questions, they can raise their hand, or if I haven't been clear about something, please let me know. Okay. By the way, this can be very consequential. This ziyad al-thiqa issue is not just an academic egg-heady thing that has no effect on real life. For example, the famous hadith of Waraqah, the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ tells the companion, a woman named Waraqah, to lead her household in prayer. Every single narration of this hadith, except one, says that the Prophet says, lead your household in prayer. Darha in prayer, like darha, her household. And scholars across the board to say dar includes men and women. Only one narration, which appears rather late in the Sunan of ad-Daraqutni, famous Shafi hadith scholar from Baghdad who died 385-995 of the Common Era. In the Sunan of ad-Daraqutni, the version says, lead the women of her household in prayer. So it's general. I mean, it's not agreed upon in all the madhabs, but it's not really controversial that a woman would lead other women in prayer. It is controversial, more controversial that a woman would lead men in prayer or a mixed congregation. But the principle of ziyad al-thiqa would allow you to take the version that says she should lead the women of her household in prayer as definitive and forget about the rest, even though the rest are much more numerous and more reliable than the one that says that she should only lead the women of her household in prayer. So that's an interesting case. By the way, this is why in the Hanbali school, for example, women can lead men in prayer in like things like Tarawih prayer and things like that, because they actually take the what is it called? Predominant evidence on this issue from the Hadiths. So anyway, that's a point where you actually see this impact legal ruling. Okay, so I'll give you some examples of how this maxim is used in law, especially Hadith debates around Hadith and law. This might be kind of boring, but this is a German university, so we're serious about these things. I mean, not that it's boring, but that it's this is the place to get into the weeds, correct? Okay. So, for example, the great Mufassir and Maliki scholar Al-Qurtubi died in 1273 of the Common Era. He says that he uses this principle, Al-Muthbit Muqaddam ala-Nafi, to argue that the reports of the Prophet ﷺ wiping over his leather socks, his khuf, which are in any case more numerous than those denying it, or that it's abrogated, supersede those that he didn't. So the reports that the Prophet did wipe over his leather socks supersede those that he did not wipe over his leather socks, based on this principle, al-Muthbit Muqaddam ala-Nafi. The famous Hanbali scholar of Damascus, Ibn Qudama, Muwaffaq Ibn Qudama, who died in 1223 of the Common Era, he cites this maxim, or he refers to it, or alludes to it, as a piece of evidence that the hadiths going against the Hanbali ruling on qasama are not definitive, or should not carry the day, right? So qasama is the issue when you have someone who's died and someone seems to have been murdered, and you don't know, either you don't have enough evidence to prove someone guilty, you don't have evidence that meets the evidentiary standard, or you don't have any idea who did it. In this case, there's a debate about the people in the neighborhood or the area where he was found, dead person was found, do they swear an oath that they didn't do it? Or does the person's family come and swear an oath that the other person, these people in the area, did do it? Or when they swear the oath, do they then have to pay the diya, the blood money for the person, compensation payment? Or does the judge or the government pay the diya? If I'm not mistaken, maybe somebody can look this up while I'm talking and tell me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to be wrong and mislead you. But as far as I know, the Hanbali position is that the people who are accused take some number of them, like 40 of them, take the oath that they did not do it, and then the government pays the diya, I think, to the person's family. Maybe somebody can look that up and tell me if I'm wrong, and correct me if I'm incorrect and give me the right answer. So what he says is all the evidence going against the Hanbali position is, should not be taken because of the principle that al-Muthbit Muqaddam ala-Nafi. A person who uses this maxim a lot is Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the great Hadith scholar of Cairo, although originally his family was from Gaza. He died in 852, 1449. I have an ongoing strong friendship across time with Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, because I'm translating Sahih Bukhari. Somebody asked me how that's going. It's going well. Well, that's all I can say. It's going well, but I've read now maybe like half of Fath al-Bari, and he uses this, mashallah, he uses this maxim a great deal. So, for example, the hadith that the Prophet did not raise his hands in prayer, the hadith he heard me, he would be very upset about this. I want to correct myself. If the hadith that the Prophet did raise his hands in prayer supersedes those that he did not raise his hands in prayer, because al-muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. Narrations affirming that the Prophet recited parts of the Quran during the noon and afternoon prayer. So in the Asr and Dhuhr prayer, you say silently, you recite surahs of the Quran or parts of the Quran. We all know that, right? The hadith, but there's narrations from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, that that he did not know if the Prophet did this, or even that he thinks the Prophet did not recite anything from the Quran in these Dhuhr and Asr prayers. But narrations affirming that the Prophet recited parts of the Quran during the afternoon prayer supersede those that he didn't, because al-muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. Reports that the Prophet did pray 2 rak'ah after the afternoon prayer, it's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, supersede Muawiyah's report that he did not pray 2 rak'ahs after the afternoon prayer, due to the principle of al-muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. Now, somebody might say, I remember when I first became Muslim, I just thought you prayed 2 rak'ah after everything, right? So I remember I was praying 2 rak'ah after Asr prayer, and my friend Muhammad Noor, rahimahullah, great guy, came up to me and said, "What are you doing, brother? You are not supposed to pray this." Very nice guy. So, but then the Prophet ﷺ did pray 2 rak'ah after the afternoon prayer, but he did it in his house, not in the mosque. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. There's another example, but it's really involved, and I don't want to explain that. So these are just several of many examples in which Ibn Hajar al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani invokes the principle of muthbit muqaddam ala nafi in his discussion. Anybody find out anything about the Qasama, Hanbali position on Qasama? We got 56 people in the audience. Come on, somebody out there has a computer and they can Google. Sheikh Muhammad Naqli, I think he would be a good person to do this. Assuming, and I know he has internet access because he's on this call. Okay, I'm just saying. Anyway, if Al-Hafidh Ahmed al-Ghumari, famous Moroccan hadith scholar, resident in Cairo, died in 1960. Famous, the oldest of the Ghumari brothers, uses this argument, al-muthbit muqaddam ala nafi, for the permissibility of combining prayers. So you can combine the Dhuhr and Asr prayer, you can combine the Maghrib and Isha prayer, without any danger or without travel. So you're not traveling, there's no rain, you're not in danger, you can still combine them, as long as you don't make it a habit, he says. Why? What's his evidence for this? Because the hadith in Tirmidhi, that in the Jami' Tirmidhi, which says that the Prophet combined his prayers when without matar or khatar, no rain, no danger, has in fact been acted on. He says, Tirmidhi says, nobody's acted on this hadith. It's narrated, but nobody ever acted on it, so it's not really taken as evidence. Al-Ghumari says, no. Some people did act on it, namely some Maliki scholars. Okay, Nabil has... Wow, this is somebody... How am I supposed to read this while I'm giving a presentation, people? You're supposed to speak out, just say the answer. Were you right or were you wrong? I'm just going to wait for someone to speak. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. Okay. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So Ahmed bin Siddiq al-Ghumar, rahimahullah, says that the fact that some people have acted on this hadith in the Maliki school means that it is evidence, right? It is a position that can be taken, because the ithbat, the affirmation of the people acting on it, supersedes Imam at-Tirmidhi's denial that people had acted on it. Okay. Now it's interesting, right? This hadith, it doesn't just appear this principle isn't just used in the context of hadith and law, but also in discussions of usul al-fiqh, and even in the application of law in courts. For example, Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi, Sheikh Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi, the great Shafi jurist and legal theorist of Baghdad, he died 476, 1083. He invokes this maxim on matters of evidence, on matters of epistemology and evidence in usul. I think that's, I can't remember which book that's in of his, or maybe his Luma, I'm not sure. And there's also the famous legal anthropologist Lawrence Rosen, in his book Anthropology of Law. He talks about in his 2 decades of observing court activity in a court in Qadi court in the rural area of Safru in Morocco. He says that this gives evidence, or he gives a report of a judge invoking this maxim in a property dispute, where he shows that it shows that this principle that al-muthbit muqaddam al-nafi shows that all things being equal, a claim of harm supersedes a denial of harm. So if someone makes a claim that they're being harmed and a party denies that they're being harmed, the claim supersedes. That's very interesting, by the way. I wonder if anyone can think of a problem with this. Anyone think of an objection to this? Do they have like a cricket sound effect? Sure.
I just need, if you can just repeat the last
Yeah,
idea.
so in a property dispute in a court in Sefru in Morocco in the probably 1970s, a woman says that her property had been harmed, and the other party denies it, and then he says that we take the principle that the affirmation supersedes the denial. Okay, I'll tell you. This occurred to me right now, which is that al-bayna ala al-mudda'i, the person making the claim is required to provide direct evidence. The person making against whom the claim is being made doesn't have to provide evidence if the claimant doesn't have any evidence. But we don't know enough. We have to go look more into the details of the case to see. But off the top of my head, I can't recall what they are.
Sorry. Oh, is there regard to the ilm itself? Because maybe the reason is the other, maybe there is another قاعدة, I'm not sure. من علم حجة على من لم يعلم. So when it's come to
similar, yeah, man, it's similar, right? Man hafidha hujjatun ala man lam yahfadh is even more famous.
Yes.
So it's similar. I think they're linked conceptually.
So it's about ilm, right? But here it's about something else. Maybe it's like حقوق or something. I'm not sure.
The claim being made. So, okay, then there's a number of examples from theological disputes. Imam an-Nawawi, famous scholar from Damascus, died in 1277 of the Common Era. He uses this evidence to show that the debate over whether the Prophet, when he went on the Isra and Mi'raj, did he actually see God with his eyes or not? And there's a number of reports and companion opinions, like most famously the opinion of Ibn Abbas, that he did see the Prophet. And then, of course, there's the opinion of Aisha, radiallahu ta'ala anha, that the Prophet did not see God, and that whoever says that is not speaking truly, not speaking accurately. And what he says, and now he says, is that the muthbit muqaddam ala nafi on this issue, right? So if you have contrasting evidence, then the affirmation of seeing God supersedes the denial that he did not see God. And again, this is invoked as well by Imam al-Bayjuri, Burhanuddin al-Bayjuri, the famous Sheikh al-Azhar, who died in 1860 of the Common Era, also on the issue of the Prophet seeing God on the Isra, in the miraculous journey to the heavens. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani again invokes it on the issue of whether the Prophet saw the jinn, or not. So there's a famous debate. You have Hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud in Sahih Muslim, that the Prophet met the jinn. So one night he alone encounters jinn and he recites some Quran to them. And that then Ibn Mas'ud and the other companions who were with the Prophet, they actually, the next day, the Prophet shows them the traces of the athar, the traces of the jinn, and says, don't use bones to wipe yourself if you go to the bathroom, like pieces of bone, because the jinn eat them. So you don't want to ruin the jinn food, basically. Now, there's another narration of the report from Ibn Mas'ud, which is in Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, which is not considered reliable generally, in which the companions themselves also see the jinn, and they say that they look like men from Zut, men who are like, I think the word is like maybe like Indians or type of Indian, people from India. But the reliable report of Ibn Mas'ud is that the Prophet saw the jinn. But then Ibn Abbas's report in Sahih Muslim, Ibn Abbas gives his story of what happened. He says the Prophet did not see the jinn and he did not recite any Quran to them. So what Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani says is that in this case, muthbit muqaddam ala nafi, the people who affirm that the Prophet saw the jinn trump those reports that say he did not see the jinn. You also have examples of it being used in actual discussions of hadith critical methodology, the actual methodology of hadith criticism and narration criticism. The famous, he's not so famous, he's pretty famous, hadith scholar Majduddin ibn al-Athir, who died 606-1210. He's the brother of the historian Ibn al-Athir, the author of Al-Kamil fi Tarikh. This is his brother. He wrote a book called Jami' al-Asul fi Hadith al-Rasul, I think is the book he wrote. In a short section on Jarh wa Ta'dil, on criticism of transmitters that he addended to this book, he says that if you have a competing Jarh and Ta'dil, so one kind of criticism of a narrator and one defense of that narrator, the Jarh, the criticism supersedes the defense, sorry, because it is, quote, awareness of additional description, ittila' ala ziyadat wasf, awareness of additional description, i.e., in other words, information that the critic of the person has that the defender does not have. This is interesting because it's linked to the principle in Jarh wa Ta'dil that al-Jarh muqaddam ala Ta'dil إذا كان الجرح ثابت مفسر السبب. But here it doesn't say, he doesn't bring this up. He just says that in the criticism supersedes the defense because it implies or seems to rely on awareness of additional information that the defender did not have. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, in his discussion of whether the successor Mujahid bin Jabr died 105 Hijri, if I'm not mistaken, did he hear from Aisha directly? Did he hear and study and learn from Aisha directly or not? Abu Hatim al-Razi died 270 Hijri, says that he did not. But Ali ibn al-Madini, who died 234, I think, 234 Hijri, Ali ibn al-Madini says he did, Mujahid did hear from Aisha. So Mujahid heard from Aisha because al-Muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, not the Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, the famous Shafi jurist, originally from Egypt, settled in Mecca, died 1565, I think 974, 1565, around that time. He died year earlier than Suleiman the Magnificent. I remember that. So he says, on the issue of did Al-Hasan al-Basri, did he hear hadiths and learn from Ali ibn Abi Talib? This is a hotly debated topic, with lots of people bringing evidence on both sides. Ibn Hajar al-Haytami says, Al-Hasan did hear from Ali, in part because al-Muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. He says this in his Fatawa al-Hadithiyya. Okay, now, the problem with maxims or qawa'id is that, they give you an incomplete picture, right? So somebody could say, the ends justify the means. But then there's another principle, which is the ends don't justify the means. So which one do you take, right? Or sometimes these maxims, they would, if you just took them and didn't take any other evidence, you would end up with a kind of ridiculous conclusion. So, and of course, Muslim scholars are aware of this. So it's important to remember that in every instance every example that I gave here so far in the talk, this maxim was invoked as one argument, one piece of evidence among many pieces of evidence. So debates about which hadith narrations are more reliable, about which opinions are more reliable, about majority opinion, minority opinion, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of evidence being invoked. This maxim is being invoked only as part of a larger argument. And sometimes Muslim scholars give us clear evidence that they're aware of its limitations. So, for example, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani says, a scholar who loved this principle, if anybody loves the principle of Muthbit Muqaddam ala Nafi, it's Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. If Donald Trump were speaking, he says, nobody likes this principle more than Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, if I were Donald Trump giving this presentation. He says on the debate about when the first revelation occurred, when did the Prophet first receive revelation and in what circumstances? He says, Al-Muthbit Muqaddam ala Nafi, illa in sahiba an-nafi dalilu nafyihi fayuqaddam. Wallahu a'lam. Right? So the affirmation supersedes the negation unless the negating party, they have their evidence. If they bring evidence to the table, we're presuming that this is evidence that all things being equal, the superseder is going to trump the denier. But if the denier has evidence and the superseder doesn't, the denier has evidence and the affirmer doesn't, then the denier wins, right? So this isn't a maxim that's invoked totally denuded of any other consideration of evidence. If the denier has superior evidence to the affirmer, then the denier wins. Similarly, Majduddin ibn al-Athir, in his deployment of that maxim in the example I gave above, he adds this important addition. He says, except if the affirmation can be manifestly disproven. So, for example, if someone says so-and-so killed a person, and then you see that person alive and well. So Ahmed says, Muhammad killed this person. And Zayd said, Muhammad didn't kill this person. Al-Muthbit Muqaddam ala Nafi. Except then you see Muhammad walking around, Muhammad's not dead. So unless there is a miracle, but خرق الأواعد لا يؤخذ في الأحكام. Right, so miraculous violations of the normal course of nature aren't admissible as evidence in legal discussions. So if you see Muhammad walking around, he did not die, and the person denying that he was killed wins in this case. Okay, thank you very much. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to, or you want to discuss this, I'm happy to. Let me see what you guys wrote about the...
It was 50 people, Professor Brown, not 40 in the Hanbali school for Hossam.
لكنه غير مضطرب عندنا في المعارضة بالذات. Yeah, but no one just, what's the ruling on the Hanbali ruling on Qasama? Is it that the judge pays or who pays? To look this up now.
Thank you, Professor Jonathan Brown, for this interesting presentation and maxims of al-fiqh in hadith criticism and hadith interpretation. And now we will come to the questions. If we have any questions in the room or online, we can begin now.
Okay, so I can start. Okay. Thank you very much, and sorry for coming late. So if I understood everything well, I have two questions. The first one, I missed the beginning, but is this maxim, what is the origin of this maxim? Is it fiqh? It seems, the qawaid, normally I don't have a lot of knowledge about this qawaid topic, but to my knowledge, this is especially a topic in fiqh. This is an instrument in the finding of norms. So what is the origin? Or has it an origin in the science of hadith? And then, as you explained, it was applied in various domains. I mean, you showed also in the domain of the Ru'ya and the Miraj, so in questions of Aqidah and etc. But it seems to me to be a principle of normative criticism, of normative interpretation above all. Is this right? That's my first question. And then the second question, which I found interesting, is that what does this say about the Muslim or Sunni conception of transmission and tradition? In the sense that, take for example this concept of ziyadat al-siqa, and as you explained, that it became accepted in the time, you know, there was this the sort of consensual use of this acceptance. And this doesn't this say that we have a conception of tradition as something which is growing, you know, tradition as something which is not the, you know, the transmission of a fixed corpus, but of something which is potentially growing, which is dynamic and which is expanding somehow, okay? And that this somehow explains also this principle of al-Musbat Muqaddam al-Nafi, in the sense that the isbat, does it have something to do with the fact that in the Islamic epistemology, yaqeen, I mean, certitude is the foundation of knowledge. You know, if you contrast this, as you know, with modern conceptions, Descartes, etc., you know, doubt is the foundation of obtaining knowledge. So we have a very different form. So just some thought that came up while listening to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's hard to know based on what I've seen, and I could be totally wrong about this, but based on what I've seen, it seems to originate in Hadith scholarship, like it literally about either additions to chains of transmission, additions to the text of Hadith, additions to the normative level of the Hadith, or information about a transmitter. And then it seems to become, to kind of proliferate from Hadith scholarship into other domains. That's my impression. I could be wrong. So I'm not, if someone else finds to the contrary, I'm happy to admit that. You know, I think the interesting thing about this, certainly in the context of Hadith scholarship, is it actually kind of goes against the general methodology of certainly early Hadith scholars, maybe the first 300 years, where they really were their main kind of means of measuring or ascertaining reliability was about ishtihar, like something being widely transmitted, versus something being narrowly or with only limited transmission. So, and this is, by the way, you know, it's not my opinion. This was brought up by many Hadith scholars already. People like Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi and others discussed this, and then other figures in the Mamluk period as well discussed this. I actually wrote an article about this topic, which probably no one ever read, called Critical Rigor and Juridical Utility, I think. It's in Islamic Law and Society. So, they pointed out, like, this is, you know, this ziyada thiqah principle kind of goes against what early Hadith scholars thought, which is that, you know, if you have 10 reports saying X and only one report saying X plus Y, why would you take the X plus Y report? That goes against how we think about evidence. On the other hand, they were also, this material was supposed to be used. So I think the biggest governor for how this principle is deployed in history and what it suggests about, what it kind of elucidates about Islamic history or intellectual history, is that it's a tradition that is there to provide things for people. It's not something that exists in a vacuum. It's supposed to give people answers, and it's supposed to give people answers for any possible question they have, and it's supposed to give people answers that are useful, right? So if you have a hadith that gives you an additional piece of information, that's tempting to take. If you have a hadith that provides an explanation when others are a little bit maybe ambiguous, you're going to be very attracted to taking that additional information. And in fact, al-Bukhari does this in his Sahih. Actually, it's one of the instances in the Sahih where Bukhari himself gives his kind of opinion on how hadiths are criticized, or more than criticized, how they're used. He says ziyada maqbula in his I think it's his chapter on I think it's in zakat. It's chapter on zakat. And because if you have one narration of hadith that gives additional information to the other, then you're going to take that and it's going to provide explanation for the other. Now, we have to remember, of course, in the case of Bukhari Sahih, it's sort of not the best laboratory for this because everything for him is reliable. But the question would be, if you have let's say, very reliable hadith, and then another version that's not so reliable that has additional information, do you take that? Because you run the risk of allowing not so reliable information to alter your understanding of reliable information. But so we don't know what Bukhari would say about that situation. But I think the primary maybe factor that is behind why this principle is so widely used, and why such use is so common, is that Muslim scholars had to give people answers, and this allowed them to expand the corpus of useful material, or productive material, so to speak.
Okay, Siraj, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Brown. My question, I think you touched on some aspects of it when you compared the utility of the qaida in hadith versus in legal issues and also in theology. And so my question is pertaining to that. To what extent does the qaida have the same level of applicability in theological matters as it does in perhaps legal or legal matters that are in the hadith, for example? Because it's not so dissimilar, I think. I mean, speaking as a lawyer now, it's not so dissimilar from the idea of the burden of proof that is used in courts. The fact that the person that's making an accusation or the prosecution would have to prove something beyond all reasonable doubt, whereas the accused person can stay silent and doesn't have to disprove anything really until the evidence of the person accusing them is considered to be sound or at least of persuasive strength. And so when we talk about al-muthbit, does that mean something which is just a strong claim, or is it something which is proven already?
So I think this is this gets, I was just looking, I unfortunately, the index of my edition is not, it's not alphabetical or whatever, but if you would actually find this maxim in like Ashbah wa Nadha'ir of Suyuti or other books, I don't recall it really being the Muthbit Muqaddimah Nafi. I don't recall it really being something you find in books of Qawaid, like what's Ashbah wa Nadha'ir books. It's almost like below the radar. It's sort of too I don't want to say too mundane. It's almost like too practical, something that they invoke kind of without.
It's assumed.
It's just right. Yeah, it's too basic a level of acceptance to make it into these higher level. But I don't see it, but I have to look more. Maybe someone who likes to search Shamila things can do this while we're talking. They can see if it comes up in like a Shbah wa Nadha'ir of Suyuti. But I think your question is really good, because if I'm not mistaken, it does actually create a problem. For example, the general principle in Islamic claims about, of obligation or liability or anything, responsibility, is that the person making a claim about the change to the status quo has to provide evidence. The person who's denying a change to the status quo does not have to provide evidence, absent the other party providing evidence, right? So, whereas what this maxim says exactly the opposite, right? The person making affirmation supersedes, all things being equal. So it's a really good question. I don't know the answer. It's actually, maybe another angle that could be taken on this topic of trying to figure out when did Muslim scholars see these things as in opposition or in counterweights to one another, how they dealt with that, as opposed, in terms of where it's used. I mean, it seems to be used in theological debates as in law, as commonly as in legal debates.
Thank you.
Do we have any
Any
other
other questions?
line?
Shocked. No one has questions.
Ziad, you have
Yeah.
a commentary or because you raised your hand at the beginning? Ziad?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I just responded to the question from Dr. Jonathan Jazakallah khairan for this nice presentation about the Hanabila. Ibn Qudamah said in the Mughni on the hadith of البينة على المدعي واليمين على من أنكر إلا في القسامة. And he said in المغني وهذه الزيادة يتعين العمل بها لأن الزيادة من الثقة مقبولة. So I think that's the hadith he was mentioning, Dr. Jonathan.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just because I didn't want to interrupt your ideas, I just wrote some notes on the chat. If you see some of them necessary, that's fine. Because there's some difference between accepting the additions of thiqat in general by muhaddithin and what was later the mainstream of the usuliyin and fuqaha. Because what al-Bukhari and al-Bazzar and many others, they say it will be accepted if he is حافظ. إذا كانت الزيادة الثقة محفوظة. So the condition is if it's sound or not. والله أعلم. So they will not accept it if it's عما يجمع حديث, like Muslim said in his muqaddimah, or if they see it from the source of wahm or mukhalafa. As you said, X plus Y or something, it's not necessarily even to accept it in general to make it absolute accepted. But later, after special Khatib Baghdadi in Kifaya, he mostly took the opinions of Usuliyin, then it was spread more widely. Still, there will be some Hufad like Ibn Rajab and others from the late scholars, even in Dhahabi, that they will not accept every ziyad of thiqah. They will see about the stage, the level, the time, if it's from who's yujma hadith or not. But in general, if we take the Usuliyin qawaid or fiqh qawaid, then it will be more than the issue of ziyad of thiqah. It will be ithbat wa adam, but all it's about if it's sound, if it's authentic, it's accurate or not, wallahu alam. And you know more than me in this issue, but I know that you made it like in a short presentation. You can go in more details if you wish. But this, if I will give a note, it's about to look about the time, المادة الزمنية. فهم يقبلون عادة زيادة ثقة مطلقا من التابعي. ما فوق التابع يقبلون إذا كان حافظا مثل زيادات مالك، شعبة، سفيان. بعد هذه الطبقة لا تكاد توجد زيادات يعني يقبلونها بشكل صريح. الا اذا كان من متاخرين الحفاظ يقبلون، هذا على تجاذب في هذا والله اعلم. فايضا يعني دراسه الجانب الزماني في الحديث هذا متى تقبل او لا، لعل هذا ايضا من الاشياء التي تنظر في الموضوع. بارك الله فيكم.
Thank you. Hanan Quda asked, is this linked to the principle of a ta'sis awla min at-ta'kid? I don't know. I'm not sure if that's, I would have to look into that. And then someone said, asked Max, how would it be perceived in relationship to, sorry, idraj? Idraj is when the words of a narrator get confused with the prophet's words. Well, that's interesting. For Ibn Hajar, he would say that, I know this because he says it all the time, that you can't make a claim about idraj unless you have evidence. So you can't say that the prophet, this is actually not the words of the prophet, this is the words of someone else, unless that requires evidence. So that actually kind of goes against, like, again, it would be against this principle, right? So in theory, if you had a hadith that said X plus Y, that would be, and then another hadith that says X, well, muthbit muqaddam al nafi, so X plus Y would win. But then you could say, well, the Y is the narrator's speech, and this is idraj. In which case Ibn Hajar would say, well, I don't know, actually, maybe it would actually fit together, because for him it would also, yeah, they would have the same result, because he would say, if you're going to make that claim, you have to provide evidence. The default assumption is that the text of the hadith is the words of the prophet, unless you can provide evidence otherwise.
Okay.
Someone else had their hand up, I think. I can't remember.
We have two questions online from Naeem Hassan and then from Muhammad Safi.
Just to elaborate on Brother Muhammad's point, I think Imam An-Nawawi frequently use it, this ziyad al-thiqa, principle in his Sharh Sahih Muslim. I think quite a few of the scholars later on in the Hadith genre, they have said that this is not a mutlaqan principle. So you just can't accept just because somebody's bringing additional information, whether it's a matanan or isnadan. My question is mainly relating to the ithbat versus nafi. Is it something? Can we find anything related to the tafsir of the Quran earlier generation? Because some of the, especially the Iraqi genre, when they are bringing up some unprecedented interpretation of the Quran, how were the scholars dealing with this interpretation, considering ithbat versus nafi principle? Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. That's a good question. I mean, we could go and look in maybe like Imam Maturidi's tafsir of the Quran and see if there's stuff in there, or I'm not sure. That would be an interesting thing to look at.
Okay.
Yeah,
Taysir,
sure.
you wanna ask?
Thank you for your presentation. That was really useful and beneficial. So I think my question to you is, like the article that you cited that you wrote, I don't remember the title of it, but I've read it and I benefited from it. I think it kind of overlaps with like a lot of contemporary debates, at least in like the Arabophone literature, about qara'in versus qawa'id. And I think Dr. Snowbody's article even was translated into English recently in one of the new companions or something like that. And so, you've got this kind of one side of the debate that wants to say something like, actually, the earlier period, the mutaqaddimin didn't really have qawa'id. It's all qara'in. And it's only these like mutaakhirin that kind of are trying to superimpose the qawa'id on them. And then I think there are others, I personally see myself in this camp, that sees that, no, there are qawa'id, but it's just subtle and it's nuanced and we kind of have to talk about it. Based upon some of the stuff you had written, I would have thought maybe you would have leaned a little bit to that there really aren't qawa'id. But it seems to me from this presentation that your description of the early period is that there are qawa'id. It's just a little bit more nuanced than that.
I mean, there's definitely qawa'id from the early period because some of them are in hadiths, like al-muda'i, al-yamin al-bayn al-muda'i. So this is, these are maxims that are actually hadiths. But again, they're always, you always have circumstances matter, so al-yamin al-bayn al-muda'i does not, what yamin al-man-ankar, if the person who is the defendant also brings bayina, then they win, right? But if the like if you have, for example, if the person making a claim, the plaintiff has bayina and the defendant swears an oath, the person wins, the plaintiff wins, right? So bayina beats an oath. So it's not like, it's not just like, oh, the defendant always wins or something. It's not like, you have to look at the actual weight of evidence in these. It's just that there's always going to be the defendant is always going to enjoy, the burden of proof is always going to be on the person making the claim, right? No matter what. And all things being equal, if things are equal, the person making the claim will lose, if things being equal. But like you could have, it could go up like many levels. So you always have to look at the circumstances. Same thing with the evidence some of the cases we discussed. I would say that, so there's always maxims, but there's also always evidence is always taken into consideration. And I think maybe what happens in some instances is that a person trying to make an argument will use a maxim sort of rhetorically or strategically to win their argument. And then we don't see their respondent, but the respondent, because we don't see the person responding to their book necessarily unless we happen to have a response. But the person responding would say, yeah, well, that's true, but it doesn't work in this case because of these circumstances. So I think by the way, I mean, it's normal that you're not going to find a lot of maxims in the first 200 years, or even let's say first 150 years of Islamic history, because, like al-mustalahat mustahdatha fil millah, technical, like in any science, technical terms, legal maxims, things like that, maxims, they're always going to come in later periods of development. They're not the things that people come up with when they first start kind of practicing a science or practicing some kind of activity. They come in later in a period of formalization. And that's not some kind of discovery that Orientalists make and then Muslims feel insecure or something like that. This is something that Muslim scholars 1,000 years ago would happily have acknowledged, which is that any of these maxims, any of these rules are always going to be later formulations.
Sorry, if you don't mind, just to follow up, just to clarify this morning. So I think I intended more the qawaid for like naqd itself. So whether it's ziyadat al-thiqa or it's wasl al-irsal or any of the ones that you mentioned within the talk, which you mentioned quite a few, they're all connected. So, I mean, one thing is to say that the qawaid are, it seems to me that some of contemporary hadith scholars want to say something like, there really aren't qawaid, it's qara'in. And then it seems that there are another group that want to say there are qawaid. And so I just was wondering kind of what
I think there are qawaid. I think they're definitely qawaid because people cite them. Even scholars like, Imam Muslim or someone like who's definitely one of the early scholars would invoke these, if not in so many words, certainly in conceptually invoke them. But they're always going to be subject to adjustment by circumstances. So they're not always good. They're never going to be categorical. They're always going to be things that work until they don't work.
Exactly.
We have another two questions in the chat. The first question is about the maxim النفي مقدم الإثبات مقدم على النفي. هل تدخل القاعدة في الجرح والتعديل? There is any relation between this maxim?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I gave example of how it's invoked by Majduddin ibn al-Athir, discusses it, and then generally this idea that jarh muqaddam ala al-ta'dil, that criticism would supersede or trump approval of somebody or defense of somebody's character. So yeah, definitely it has a manifestation in the science of transmitter criticism.
Can I just ask something, because I had the same question, because I had always in mind, adab, excuse me, the notion of adab, jarh wa ta'dil, that, I mean, there are many conditions for jarh, as far as I know. I mean, so I was a little bit surprised that this maxim is applied to jarh in the sense. I mean because as far as I understood, scholars were quite careful with jarh, except maybe some.
They were, but they are also, remember that, I mean, the asl, the presumption for human beings is the fisq, except if you're in the Hanafi school, I think it's like the first couple of generations are assumed to be acceptable. But I mean, the general presumption is that people are not good people, so that's why an unknown narrator makes a chain of transmission unreliable, because if they were unknown and anonymous, you could assume, for example, if it's an unknown narrator and you want to know if they're free or a slave, the presumption is they're free, because that's the default presumption for human beings. But the default presumption for character is fisq, is that you're like a dirtbag or something, you're not a good person. This is a good approach generally for people trying to sell you things, in my opinion, as well. So and this, as far as I know, it's quite common to say, الجرح مقدم على تعديل إذا كان الجرح ثابت مفسر السبب. But there's, you can see there's details here, right? Which is that criticism supersedes or trumps positive evaluation, provided the criticism is reliable. Like you can trace, it actually comes from the person who says it. It's not just some random person on the street saying it. And then also, what's the reason for this criticism? But if you have that, then that's going to beat an approval. That's quite common.
The notion of isbat is quite strong. I mean, isbat is,
No, but it's not. I mean, no, it's not. It's not here. Thabit isn't like it's true about the person. If I say, Taysir is a dirtbag. No offense, Taysir, right? The question of it's bad here isn't, is Taysir actually a dirtbag? The question is, did Jonathan Brown actually say that Taysir is a dirtbag? If you have my book transmitted from me by transmitters, and it's been properly studied by the person, I say, look, I have Jonathan Brown's book here. I have an isnad to the author of the book, and he said Taysir is a dirtbag. And I say he's a dirtbag because when we lived together in Cairo, he never did his laundry and he ate my cheese all the time without my permission. This is not true, by the way. Taysir is a very kind and clean person. So, but if now you have it's Thabit back to me, and I gave you my reasons. I explained exactly what the problem is, why I'm criticizing him, what the nature of his problem is. That's Thabit's mufassir sabab. Not necessarily. I could be wrong, but that's the issue. Is if you have somebody else saying, no, Taysir is a wonderful guy, my criticism is going to beat his other person's approval.
Okay, we have another question from Hanan Ouda.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Doctor, for all of this explanation. And I think maybe we have to go back to the reason behind this maxim, because it's because of the ziyadat al-ilm. So there is ziyada fil ilm. The original case is there is negative. There is like bara asliya, or there's nafi. So it's the original case. But when there is something what we call it, that there's ijab, or there is an act, for example, or there is ziyadat ilm in another way. So this is why there is it precede the.
But of course, it's a claim of a claim of additional knowledge. It's not actually additional knowledge; it's a claim of additional knowledge, and that's why it's it's not clear that it should. I mean, it's if we knew this information were correct, there probably wouldn't be a debate. But because the debate often is whether or not you accept this information, and then the answer is you accept additional information, you accept affirmation over denial. Then that's actually to respond to the question of whether this knowledge is in fact
exactly. And yes, sorry. So the word ilm, what does it mean, right? We don't talk about any information. We are talking about something. Mostly it is right, because it's so. I think they are accurate in their explanation for this qaida, for this maxim. It's ziyadatu ilmin. They didn't say another thing. They said ilm, and it is a specific word, right?
I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it more to be able to answer your question specifically. It's hard for me to answer definitively, in this giving a Q&A and a talk. It's very complicated for me. I mean, I think this is, you have a situation in which people are, making claims about knowledge or facts, and then saying that the claim itself makes the claim acceptable. But the point is that we don't know if the claim is acceptable. So it sort of strikes me as being an element of circular reasoning here, which I think is not my discovery. I think Muslim scholars in the past would happily have acknowledged that this was a problem.
Yeah, thank you.
We have another question from Muiz Muhammad. Can you please unmute yourself? Okay.
Oh, sorry. Did any of the early Mu'tazila scholars discuss this maxim?
I haven't seen anybody, but I should go, and if I got my act together fast enough, I would have gone and done some kind of shameless search of this maxim more broadly. But as I said, this is really only what I came across in my own reading over the past 23. No, it can't be 23 years. 15 years. Let's say 15 years. So I don't know. It would be interesting to see if they use this in their books. That would be an interesting question.
Okay, we have another question from Naeem Hassan.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Brown. Just trying to understand, where does this principle fit in the contemporary historical critical methodology? Because I'm just trying to think it, comparing with the biblical studies. As you know, the synoptic gospels, when they compare with the Gospel of John, when the Gospel of John is bringing some new information in the light of historical critical method, they don't accept it. So where does the contemporary scholarship, Western scholarship, would view that kind of principle?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Of course, Western scholars are not, they're not like computer programs, right? I mean, they also are, influenced by their own biases, right? So I think that as far as I know, the general kind of methodological starting point would be that if you have, let's say, different manuscripts, the manuscript with additional material is probably suspicious, right? Because the idea is someone would add in additional material to explain something, whereas they wouldn't take out additional material, right? So if you have all things being equal, you have a manuscript saying A, B, a manuscript saying A, probably just A is the correct original version, and someone else added in B. This is the example of their principle of, I think, lexico difficilior, right? The more difficult reading. So the thing that is the thing that makes the least sense is probably the original version, because why would you change something into something that doesn't make sense? You would change it into something that does make sense. So that's their one principle, which would seem to kind of go against the muthbit muqaddimah al-nafi. But also, people are, you can see this often with Western scholars in their study of early Islamic history, which is they also want answers. So if they find a source that, is maybe not promoting like a Sunni orthodoxy, like in academia nowadays in general, any position is, as long as it's not Sunni Islam, it's acceptable, because Sunnis are the only people who are like the I don't know, whatever, the religious, oppressive and religious, I don't know what we would be called, but so if they find something that is giving some information that goes against this sort of Sunni orthodoxy version of history, even if that provides much more information than other sources, they'd probably be inclined to take it. So in this case, they would take additional material, even though it's they would take the muthbit muqaddimah al-nafi in this case. But that's I think that you'd really have to look at these how scholars acted in specific situations. I think because scholars are not, again, they're not these disembodied minds. I mean, they're products of social circumstances and their own cultures and biases, and so they tend to act differently and maybe not be totally consistent all the time in how they apply their methodologies.
Okay, I have a question. It's according to the question of ziyadat al-thiqa in hadith criticism. And the question is, how can we deal nowadays with this ziyadat al-thiqa in the different hadith versions if we discussed this problem from 2 points of view? The first point of view is hadith authenticity, if this addition of a thiqa can be ascribed to the Prophet or not. And then another aspect is how can we deal with this addition of thiqa in hadith exegesis or in hadith interpretation? Because as you know, there is a big debate between hadith scholars about acceptance of the thiqa.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not qualified to say which camp is correct. So, I mean, I could only, as you said, there's disagreements about like maybe sort of manhaj al-mutaqaddimin or manhaj al-mutaakhirin on this question. And I that's about maybe the thubut of a certain, let's say, version of hadith over another, the kind of reliability of it. But the second part of your question, I think, is actually much more, is, I don't, I think it's more interesting. I think also maybe influential and more subtle, which is that you will regularly see scholars of all ideological leanings, whether they're early scholars, later scholars, very critical, very lax, which is they'll regularly take narrations that have additional information in their interpretation of the hadith, right? Which, as you point, I mean, as we've discussed, is somewhat problematic, right? If you have a version of a hadith that is not very reliable and it provides explanatory material, but that explanation itself might not be reliable, then if you rely on that explanation, you take it into account, you will be going down the wrong path. It'd be no different than you taking a hadith that was not reliable, right? Which is a question for which I have no answer. That I don't have an answer for that. I think that ideally, you would only allow your understanding of one hadith to be influenced by a hadith of equally strong reliability, right? But that's often not the case. And yeah, I don't have an answer for that. A student asked me about this once as well, and I said, I don't have an answer. If someone else has an answer, then I would appreciate them answering, because I can't give anything useful.
Yes, there is a comment from Ziad. Ziad, you can explain what you wrote in Arabic here for others.
Yeah, what I would say is it could be more accurate if we differentiate between the نقاد الحديث, the grand نقاد of hadith scholars, not about متقدمين ومتأخرين, because you can find some in early periods like Tirmidhi, like Ibn Jarir, they were a bit, they have some ease, and they were a bit, they are called that to be متساهل. But you can find some later muhaddithin like Daraqutni and later Ibn Rajab, Al-Dhahabi, Ibn Abdul Hadi, Shams Muhammad Abdul Hadi, and others. They were more going with the old and looking more about the Ilal al-Hadith, and this what it was mentioned by many Huffaz al-Hakim and Salah that it was rare between the Huffaz by themselves. So to differentiate between نقاد المحدثين, or who was more affected with the usuli manahij and the متأخرين fuqaha, who will not go seek directly in the علل and qara'in and to see the deep, because what's علل? علل is awham thiqat, and this is not for everyone, because what you say, this is da'if, this is munqata, it's easy to people to know about history with not that wide knowledge. But to know the differences between this is accepted, even this is thiqa, but he made a mistake here, in this particular thing, it was not accurate. This is a very advanced and deep knowledge. So to refer between them both, it could be more accurate, because at the late eras, mostly they will make it absolute. زيادة الثقة مقبولة المثبت مقدم على النافي at general. And we can say that they are in their قواعد, they are wrong, because they are also following the early قواعد, but about the تطبيق العملي ورؤية يعني تعريف الحديث صحيح, if we can speak it in Arabic, without كل الشروط متفق عليها لكن من غير شذوذ ولا علة قادحة. Who know this condition about شذوذ علة قادحة? It's only the high professional محدثين who are following the early نقد. So it's about نقد الحديث وإعمال قواعد وقرائن ونصوص المتقدمين, وبالبحث توجد كثير منها. That was my point, only to make it a bit more accurate to say about it's not about the time as it's much about following the grand scholars in their opinions and their decisions. Wallahu a'lam.
Do we have any?
Very, very lucid. Thank you.
Okay, if we don't have any questions, we would like to thank you once more, Professor Brown, for this interesting topic and the answering of the questions. And we wish to have you soon in Tübingen in person, inshallah.
I would love that. Thank you very much, you guys, for inviting me and everybody for coming and for your questions and for being patient with me.
Question from Rashid Abdul Ghani before we close.
Alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Thank you, my brothers. Actually, I just want to appreciate your effort, you guys. This is Rashid Abdulghani from Nigeria, from Gombe State University. I received your invitation and I decided to join the session. I found it very interesting. Keep it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Salama.
Yes, thank you. Thanks again, Dr. Jonathan Brown. It was a pleasure. Where is he? I can't see him. He left.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, so and thank you for everybody attending. So next week there won't be a session because we will be in London at the BRISE conference, but the week afterwards we will begin our series. Thank you very much for attending, and have a nice evening.
Assalamu alaikum.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.